Episode 88, The Matrix Episode, Part 1. Welcome to the Visionary Variety Podcast, where we cover cool stuff like photo, video, film, books, and technology. So switch on your brain and enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Gabriel Grove, and in this episode, my brother Gabriel Grove, Abi León, and myself will be discussing the Matrix trilogy, its story, its characters, the philosophy, and a lot of really deep, awesome stuff. So take the red pill and fasten your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye. All right, I am so excited for this episode, and in case you missed it, Abi León is on the show with us. Abi, why don't you say hi?
Hey, everybody. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, it's always a treat having you on the show. And Abi León, you have your own YouTube channel and podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's called, it's under Lion Tree Media, but the podcast is called Lion's Den Podcast, The Lion's Den Podcast. And just Google it. It's usually one of the top 3 that pop up. So yeah, awesome. Go follow, like, subscribe, help me out. Thanks.
Great. So that's your podcast name. Your YouTube channel, is it the same thing?
Yep, the same thing.
Okay, cool. The Lion's Den. One of these days, Daniel's going to be in the Lion's Den. Just saying.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
It's meant to be. It's a setup.
Getting pretty good at those dad jokes.
I got 4 kids. I better be good at them by now. And also, Gabriel, you're on the show too. Why don't you say hi, introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm really glad to be back on. I'm really excited about this super episode. It's gonna be a lot of fun to talk about, and it's been a topic that always comes up in my conversation somehow. But yeah, I mean, I my attractiveness to this movie is mainly from my martial arts background. So I run a karate school. Indy Ronful's been doing martial arts for about 20 years.
Wow.
And so I really enjoy the choreography and the work that gets put into the stunts.
Yeah.
And then just aside from the philosophy of the movie, it gets pretty deep. It hits a lot of pointers for me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we're going to explore the deepness and the depths of this wild story and all the movies tied into it, because it gets deep. You can just keep going, and it's like, wow, there's layers and layers, and things you won't catch just watching the movie. You got to read up and look at some of the other content, like the video games and the animatrix and stuff explains things. So I like that person. I like the big universe, like Star Wars universe. I love it because it's so deep. You can always get deeper and find some cool, layer to something else elsewhere. So we'll get to that. Just a little mark in history. The first movie came out in 1999. So some other big things that were going on at that time was Y2K. That happened or didn't happen.
Yeah.
Y'all remember Y2K?
I do. How old? You weren't that old, were you? How old were you?
I was born in 88, so I was 12.
Yeah, 12.
11, 12, yeah.
Do you remember it, or you just remember hearing about it?
Oh, I remember it. Like, I don't remember the world events that were happening because there was actually a lot of wild stuff that was going on around America and I guess the world. But I just remember like waiting for it to happen. And I had this crazy illusion in my head. Gabriel, you probably recall this. I imagined the world transforming into a beautiful futuristic like utopia when 2000 hit. I was just like,
I think you drew a lot of drawings about that.
Oh yeah, I drew cityscapes with flying cars and tubes, and everyone had futuristic.
You thought it was just going to flip over.
Yeah, I mean, it should have happened already because it feels 99.
Well, yeah, 2015 is gone by now. That was when Marty McFly was supposed to have gone into the future. I was in the military. I was a logistics specialist, so my whole job revolved around computers and making sure that So yeah, I remember for about a solid 3 months, we didn't know what was going to happen.
Oh man.
And we were waiting on the Department of Defense to send down updates to all of our machines so that we can update them.
Good grief.
And they would, because everything was done with the 2-digit year code. And we're like, what's going to happen now? And so
we're going to die.
Yeah, we thought we were going to lose inventory and everybody was... There was some shady stuff going on too. I won't implicate some of my fellow service members, but there was some shady stuff going on.
I came across an entire podcast about the Y2K incident.
Oh, yeah?
And I definitely want to take some time to listen to that. I think there's a lot that I didn't know about when I was just, a sheltered Christian 11-year-old. I just didn't hear about from the news. But yeah, so Y2K was a big marquee moment. Technology, computers were becoming very common. I mean, we had a Dell, but it was a Compaq with a Q. Compaq. The most awkward word. Compaq desktop computer. My dad swore that we would never touch and use it ever. And in about 2 weeks' time, we knew everything about it, and we were teaching him how to use it.
Yeah, that's true. And then he got another one, and it became ours. Yeah. And that was like our lifeline when we were at our grandparents.
Oh, man, that was great. Sim Tower. What else do you need? SimCity. During the filming of Matrix Reloaded, 9/11 attack happened in 2001, and that was really wild. I was watching a behind-the-scenes video where they were talking about what it was like when that happened. They were in Australia filming. I think they were filming Reloaded, and it was just like, what do they do? Crazy. Very big upset to the filming schedule, I'm sure. So big time in 2000 happened, and a lot of technology was changing. Virtual reality was becoming, an understandable concept. And then this movie drops. It's just like, wow. I bet people walked out of this theater wondering, like, what did I just watch? What is life?
Am I asleep?
Yeah, am I in the Matrix? I mean, I wonder if this affected people with mental illness and paranoia.
That's a great point, because one big event, and this is very significant, because Matrix got a little bit of backlash for this because of the nature of, revolt and everything like that, and towards the end of the movie, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But a lot of people forget that Columbine happened a month after it was released. Columbine happened in April. Yeah. So a lot of people pointed to the Matrix for the violence. And
I thought I recalled hearing that a shooter, maybe the Columbine shooter or a later one, did reference the Matrix as a big inspiration for the shooting scenes. Right?
No, it was the outfits. Okay. The outfits, because they wore
trench coat.
They wore the trench coats. Yeah. And then after that, there became this big old thing called the trench coat mafia. Schools started to ban trench coats at schools. Because up until then, I mean, it was part of the goth scene, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the inspiration of why the Wachowskis used trench coats, because they were goth, they were the outcasts and whatnot, and that scene. So, that was a pretty significant tragedy that happened. And I would say 3 or 4 weeks after Matrix was released.
Wow, what a mess! That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Well, some other movies that come to mind when I think of the greatness of the Matrix and the whole trilogy. I'm going to say it up front. I like the sequels. I like them. I think they're great. So you may have a different opinion, and it'll be great to talk about. There's a lot of trash going on, a lot of hate for 2 and 3. It's like the Star Wars prequels. I think they're good for a lot of reasons. There's some low points, of course, but it's just like the cool thing to just like, episode 1 through 3 were utter crap all the way through. I'm like, no, they weren't. And I feel like Reloaded and Revolutions gets a really bad rap, even though they were pretty great movies. So anyway, we'll get to that later. So some other movies that came out after and maybe 1 or 2 before The Matrix that I feel kind of are in the same vein of, you need to double check what reality is, or simulations, or technology becoming sentient. Were the first one that comes to mind is The 13th Floor. Have y'all seen this movie?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw it a long time ago. It was, but I don't think I saw it all together at once. I think I saw it collectively in pieces. So I need to watch it all the way through.
Yeah, 13th Floor was really good. It came out, what did you say, Abi, a year before The Matrix?
No, it actually came out after The Matrix.
Oh, interesting.
Matrix came out in March, and 13th Floor came out in May.
What about Equilibrium? Was that before The Matrix?
Equilibrium was after.
Oh, that was after as well. I thought that was before.
Yeah, but I think the big thing was that the 13th Floor was in production before The Matrix.
Yeah.
So that was the big thing, which was where people were saying, "Oh, they ripped off each other" and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know. Yeah. It's one of those things. I think we talked about that one time. Remember, we talked about in a previous podcast, twin films. Yeah.
Script ideas and maybe that's what happened. Who knows? Another movie is Source Code, much more current than The 13th Floor. But the Source Code is a really great movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, one of my favorite actors. Lots of mind-bending, like what ifs. And the ending I don't like. I don't know if we'll have time to get to that, but maybe that's a discussion for another day. Of course, there's Tron, where we're in the digital computer ecosystem, and there's sentient, anthropomorphic, people that are actually computer programs. Next is Dark City. That was a mind-bending movie. Have y'all seen that?
That one was
Dark City. I never heard of that.
It's enjoyable once you figure out what's going on, which is halfway through the movie.
That one came out a year before.
Okay, there we go.
I think it came out in like 97 or 98.
Yeah, the visuals definitely seems like it.
Mm-hmm.
But good to watch just so you can say you did. I don't know if I want to watch it again, but I was thoroughly frustrated for the first third or half of the movie, trying to figure it out. And then it finally reveals and you're like, whoa, this is awesome.
Yeah, I think that was before the whole twist ending craze. Like nobody did that before. Like I think Dark City was probably one of the first ones that did that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, there was always like plot twists that like, oh, I didn't see that coming, but like where it completely blindsides you. That was one of the first ones that did
I like that.
Yeah.
Next is The Truman Show. Personal favorite. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, same.
Yeah, living inside of a fake world that's controlled, and
I think that one and The 13th Floor are very similar. Because remember, Truman drives away. He tries to drive out and he can't get to the end. And then when he does, every time he gets to the end, he's blocked off, right?
Yeah.
13th Floor is the same way. Like he can't get to the end. Finally, he does. And when he gets to the end, it's digital. Yeah, it's like a wireframe. Oh, yeah.
That was so cool. Yeah. And his boat rips and Truman Show, his boat rips into the paper wallpaper of Sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
That's trippy.
Mm-hmm. And then last but not least, and Abi, this is something you added, a Twilight Zone episode. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So this happened I just started watching the new Twilight Zone on CBS, the All Access app. And I just said, oh, well, I'm just going to start. I haven't seen all of the old Twilight Zone, so let me just start from the beginning. And the very first episode was about virtual reality, like living in a virtual reality. If you give me a second here, and let's see, 1959.
Dang, what?
Yeah.
What do they know about virtual reality?
Well, that's actually part of the kind of whole conspiracy theory about it.
Ooh.
Because they had it was here he goes. The episode is called "Where's Everybody?" This guy just all of a sudden just shows up in this town where nobody is. Long and short, he's trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And
the spoiler alert if you haven't watched this this
70
episode
years, I think spoiler
70 years, right? He ends up like freaking out and he's breaking, and these military members that are watching him on screen like say, okay, pull him. And they pull him out of this box where basically they're registering, well, how long did it take him to break? Like 480 hours is what they say. 482 hours.
Wow. That's so awesome.
Is how long he lasted in there before he broke.
That's like source code.
A little bit. But I just think it was interesting that he didn't realize that he was jacked into this virtual reality. Like so all of his senses. I mean, everything from the plugs on his head to being enclosed in this container, to being observed by outside forces, to see how he would react. It was really, really interesting. I mean, it was Twilight Zone 70 years ago.
Wow. That sounds like a technological version of MK Ultra.
Yeah.
Fooling the mind and testing the limits of human, whatever.
Yeah, of human. Yeah. I think they said that they were testing how long a man could go being alone.
Yeah.
And so 480 hours was the limit.
All right, so let's get into talking about the movie. So I want each of you guys to kind of share, briefly, like, what was your experience like, if you remember when you first watched it, or at least, in those years following, what was y'all's opinion and experience like with the movie?
I remember not knowing much about it, just seeing a really weird trailer that didn't make sense. So not a whole lot of things that we could do on post. I mean, Fort Hood is largest military base in the world, but the city that we lived in didn't have a whole lot going for it. So we would go to the movies almost all the time. And this movie, the trailer just didn't make sense, but it was sci-fi. So you're like, okay, what's this about? So it was created enough intrigue. My point is, went to go watch it. And as soon as me and my friend, my battle buddy, as soon as we came out, we kind of just looked at each other. We're like, what just happened? And so, and he said, let's go back in, man. And so we paid for another ticket and watched it back to back twice.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's worth it.
That's cool.
Yeah. And it's like, because we were just so tripping out. We had never seen anything like it.
That's great.
It was amazing. We just walked right back into the theater. We're just like, hey, we're just going to go watch it again. And we did. I mean, like I think I've said this in conversation outside of the podcast that it's one of the movies that influenced me to become a movie maker or become a filmmaker, videographer, whatever. I'm like, that's the kind of stories I want to tell. Things that challenge your worldview, challenge your point of view. And it was just magnificent.
Beautifully.
Yeah, magnificent. It's my number one all time.
Really?
The whole idea of this episode came as a result of two things. First is the fact that Matrix 4 has been announced, and we just got a new announcement that there's 2 Matrix movies in production by different directors.
This is too much.
I know, right?
This is too much.
Like, I'm not worthy. And there was a Keanu Reeves. Whoa. Yeah, so there's Matrix 4 is, of course, the sequel, and there's going to be a prequel movie of some kind. And as we'll get into later, there is plenty of prequel material to pull from. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah, so that got announced. And of course, Abi, you've said numerous times, which I completely agree with, is that Matrix is your number one film. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to do a Matrix episode with Abi. It's going to be deep and awesome. And then Gabriel, you said you did some paper on it in the college, or what was that?
Yeah, in writing composition class, my second semester, the professor was awesome, and she gave us total freedom on whatever subject. And so she wanted us to do a movie review of any movie you wanted and do whatever form of paper you want. Wow. We watched Super Bowl ads and we analyzed commercials, and she had homework that we had to watch Black Panther. But it was all writing. It was awesome. So I got to write about the Matrix trilogy. So I hit on a few things, and I focused mainly on the philosophy and religious themes stuff of it. So it was really cool, and I was so excited. I had like literally an adrenaline rush writing this thing in class.
That's great.
I was so excited. And I actually stayed after, and I wrote way past the limit.
She's like, you need to leave my classroom.
Get out, please. I haven't closed the campus now. You got to leave. So I stayed after, and I was like an adrenaline rush writing this thing. It was so much fun. And later I read it again. I was like, whoa, that's actually pretty good. Whoa.
Gabe, do you remember what your experience was early or initially when you watched the movie?
It feels like such a long time ago. And I watched it again. I'm like, wow, it's still a relevant, good movie, except for a few scenes that were questionable CGI. Sure. But anyway, that'll come up later, I'm sure. But my friend and I, from high school, he was an exchange student from Switzerland, Jan Schneider, and we're actually trying to get him on some podcast in the future because he's awesome. We went to go to the movie theaters to see The Matrix, and we weren't really sure what to expect, but he did his research, and he's like that. He spoils movies for himself, and then he watches them. But he didn't tell me, so I was completely shocked, and I had to go see it again as well. I think I saw it again maybe a couple weeks later after I had some time to digest and kind of look at all the videos about it and stuff. But I just love the idea of being plugged in and your body is in a future real reality. And then what about the AI? What did they do? And where are they going? And why didn't they leave the planet? And all these questions. And does our body actually generate whatever the movie said? And I don't think it does. And, it was just kind of funny. But yeah, it was amazing. I love the themes, the colors. Everything.
It just really hits on all cylinders for my brain.
It really does.
In multiple ways. I don't remember seeing the movie itself or the second one like in theaters, but I do remember seeing the third one with Michael. It was you were probably with us too, but we were visiting our grandparents, Gabriel, and we saw it in theaters. And I was, at that time I was probably 13 or 14 then, and it was just like so awesome, man. I was probably smiling from ear to ear. My brain was just like firing full neurons.
It was the first DVD I ever bought.
Oh,
yeah, it was the first. Well, I mean, up until then, everybody bought VHS still.
Yeah.
But it was the first DVD I ever bought. And I just thought, I still have the DVD actually as part of my collection. It's like my proud.
Frame it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, put it in a shadow box.
And I remember not just because it was the first DVD that I bought, but because the PX or the BXPX, the AFES store on Post, accidentally put it out one day ahead of release, and I'm like, it's not supposed to, the street date is tomorrow. I'm gonna grab this right now, and
that's so funny.
And yeah, I had it one day early, and we watched it all in the common room in the barracks.
It was a glitch in the Matrix.
I got the Matrix, and
nice.
we all watched it downstairs, and so that was cool. Pretty fun.
So this movie has become a huge cultural icon, and I just wanted to talk about that for a second. Like, what do you guys think about that? Why? Why did it hit so big? Why has it been like ripped off so many times?
I think the biggest thing that helped it stand out was the revolutionary visuals that it presented. Because like we've said, there's always been a simulacra, simulation movie out in some regards. I mean, I just told you, 1959, Twilight Zone. There was a simulation type thing. Sure, the story was more grandiose, but I think the one standout was the visuals that visual director, visual supervisor John Gaeta helped mold around the movie that made it just like you said, it hit on all cylinders. Okay, it was a great story. It was great casting. It was amazing visuals, location. It hit, like, it checked off every box, every quadrant.
It was unforgettable because of visuals.
Mm-hmm. And I think that helped it stand out. And so what ends up happening is that when you have it hitting on all cylinders, breaking box office records and whatnot, you get people talking about it, and then it just becomes, it was probably it probably led to its virility, is just being able to everybody was talking about it. Did you see Matrix? Did you see the Matrix? I remember went back and saw it like 3 or 4 other times after that first 2 times that I watched it, because it was just like, oh my gosh, this is just amazing. And so, it was viral before viral was a thing. And I think that's why it stayed in the consciousness of society, because it was just culturally viral.
Have y'all seen the clip of Will Ferrell doing a parody of The Architect?
Yeah.
Ergo.
I don't want to. Ergo.
So,
you know what?
I don't even know what that word means. Ergo.
It's a funny clip.
It's kind of like the Latin version of "and so" because of.
Oh, that's a figure.
Yeah.
It also makes you sound very intelligent.
That was with Justin Timberlake was in that too.
Yeah.
Justin.
So moving on to a little bit of a discussion about the cinematography. Colors are a huge part of this movie. We see green being used heavily. It is so green in the simulated world, in the Matrix. Everything is freaking green, and your eyes just kind of adjust to it. I feel like the normal viewer won't even think about it. I think about it because I know what color grading is, and I'm a photographer, and I do colorization on a lot of things to make them pop or give them some story element, and they use that very strongly in this movie. Abi, do you know if this was digitally color graded yet, or was that a thing yet? 99.
Yes, 2000? It was. It was digitally color graded. Okay. It wasn't the first all digital movie. That was "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Yeah, right.
But it was digitally color graded.
Okay.
So yeah,
cool.
Yeah, it was.
So we got green everywhere when you're inside the Matrix, the simulation itself. But when you come out into the real world, it's a lot of blue. There's some natural color tones, like when they're in Zion, it's kind of like just desaturated. But there's a lot of blue in the real world, and I like that. It makes it a little easier, maybe even subconsciously, to differentiate where you are and what's going on. Gives a little bit of separation, instead of like, wait, which world are we in? It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. I like that move. And I first thought that my TV was messed up when because I don't remember what it looked like in theaters, but when I watched it on my TV, I was like, wait a minute. Now that I'm more familiar with the movie, now I'm actually looking at the visuals. I'm like, hey, is my TV off balance? So I didn't know.
They recently remastered it into HDR, and I haven't bought that yet. But I have one of those really nice fancy TVs, and I really want to watch to see what the difference. Basically, the brights are brighter and the darks are darker, and the gradients of
better color rendition on those screens, right?
Yeah, the dynamic range is significantly wider.
Some other visuals that are iconic is, of course, the Matrix code falling. That was like everybody had that screensaver for a few years.
Actually, I still do on my podcast. If you watch in the background, if you watch in the background of my guest, it's on my screen.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that's on purpose, because that's That's my
because
thing.
you're in the Matrix.
Yeah.
I remember trying to recreate it in Adobe Flash. I had a ripped off version of Flash. I loved making visual effects and animations, and I tried so hard to copy, but I never quite figured it out. Looking it up into the behind the scenes stuff, I did find out that the code was mostly like some kind of mirrored version of kanji, Japanese characters.
Yeah.
And so they're made up characters, but they're like, kind of chopped up and whatever photoshopped versions of some Japanese characters and some American characters.
Right.
And a lot of the Japanese letters, and this is the guy that designed them, says that he copied his wife's, was it ramen recipes or sushi? I think it was a sushi recipe. Yeah. So that's what that all is chopped up versions of a sushi recipe.
That's funny.
With some extra random characters.
Salmon.
Yeah. The reflections really stood out to me in this movie. They really used glasses reflections really heavily, in the spoon reflection too. And I just thought that was really striking how they shot. I still don't understand how they shot some of the scenes are really complex, because when you're looking at a shiny object, guess what you can see? The camera. And there's one scene where it shows the really close up of the doorknob, and I think Morpheus reaches for the doorknob and opens it. And what they did was, the camera, of course, is like waist level, looking smack dab at a doorknob close up. And what they did was they disguised the camera and they wrapped it in the leather jacket. So he's holding like something, I think, under his arm, and that's actually the camera. And they painted part of his tie over the part of the camera that would be covering up the tie. And in slow mo, you can actually see like, oh yeah, there's kind of a weird crease there that doesn't look right. But in video, it's moving and it's really quick shot, so you don't see it. Yeah. But that is just so clever. Like they literally painted over the camera and disguised it as non-camera. And there's that scene when Neo takes the pills. There's like the reflections off of Morpheus' glasses. That's just really wild. And I don't know how. I mean, they had to have done some object removal in the reflections themselves. Because I don't know, it's just impossible to not get some camera lighting equipment in there. What do you guys think about that?
I think they just mask. I think they just use masks, like just matte masks.
Yeah.
And they just,
fake the reflection.
Yeah, they fake the reflection.
Yeah, but it's still pretty complex because there's 3D movement, there's tracking, really good tracking, really good.
Well, he
masking.
stays pretty still in that scene. Yeah, so it wouldn't have been difficult.
But there's somewhere he looks like the character, either Morpheus or Neo, looks left and right quite a bit. And you can see the lights, kind of refracting and moving with his head movement, but you don't see anything else. And he casts crew or cameras. And those scenes just really trip me out.
Great point.
Yeah. So I don't know what they did. This is 99. They didn't have what we have now, but they had some stuff. Anyway, bullet time. Let's get to this, and then we'll get into the depths of the story. So, Abi, tell us how bullet time works. What's going on?
Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if I did mention it earlier, John Gaeta was the visual effects supervisor. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to basically figure out a way that he can warp time without having to overcrank or undercrank. I remember at first they had tried just a helicopter rig where they just spun it really fast, but nothing was going. It just wasn't feasible because the camera would fly off of the the mount or whatever. Yeah, so they tried that. They tried several different types of rigs, and they ended up going with some of the original DSLRs.
Wow, what were those? Do you know? Like Nikon?
I couldn't tell you. Yeah, I think they were Nikon. And they thought, so they'd put a film camera on one end and a film camera on the other end. Yeah. They'll run them, and then they just had like this board trigger, kind of like what they do with squibs or bullets. And then they would fire each camera in sequence. And so,
how many did they have?
Oh man,
over 100.
I remember seeing the behind the scenes photo of the whole green studio. And
it was a full spiral at least.
Yeah. It was several dozen. I think if it was anything, it would be increments of 24 because of 24p. So it would be increments of 24. So I don't know, at least 48. Not only were they trying to just go around, but they were also trying to develop, moving forward, moving backwards, and being able to, play with that time. Mm-hmm. John Gaeta goes really deep, and if you're not familiar with overcranking or undercranking video, then it gets really complex. Then you start getting into time calculations. I don't know how to talk about the theory of overcranking and undercranking without getting into like real technical details.
Does it have to do with shutter speed and time?
Yeah, shutter speed and all that stuff, so that you get the real motion effects and I mean, there's
a blur or not.
Yeah, there's actually math involved in how they set up the rig. But eventually they came up with what everybody sees, which is that circular rig with the green screen and everything like that, and then digitally remove every camera lens in post. And they went through about 4 or 5 different iterations of the rig before they came up with the rig that is now popular on memes. The rig that goes around Neo or around Trinity.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, a fun fact, the next movie that used it was the very first X-Men, when Wolverine is swinging around the Statue of Liberty.
Huh.
He kind of extends his claws.
Yeah. He has his claws in the head and he's swinging around.
Yeah, that was the next movie that they actually used that rig on.
Lost in Space 1998 had like a faked version of this, where I think they may have had a few stills at like wider angles from each other, and they did some kind of weird 3D mapping or 3D warping between the shots. Do you all recall that scene? It's when they go into the sun.
No, not at all.
Oh,
They're in the med bay, and they're flying in the air. It freezes, and the camera moves like back into the right, and they're like frozen in air. But you can tell there's something off, something fake 3D.
It kind of phases between the actual shots.
Yeah,
it is weird.
There was another one that used it, and it was Password Swordfish with John Travolta, Hugh Jackman, Halle Berry. And it's that scene where that bomb blows up. And they used it, but it wasn't the same rig. They used it just to slow down time. But it wasn't a revolution like they did in the first X-Men.
Yeah.
So it was more just to like a bunch of still images where you could walk in the scene.
Yeah.
And then they digitally composited it afterwards. So it wasn't the same, but it was the same technology, but it wasn't the same it wasn't bullet time.
Yeah.
Sounds like kind of like the one with Jet Li when he was supercharged. He was moving really fast and everybody else moving really slow, and he would kind of zip between and beat him up.
That was interesting. Yeah. Those guys were totally faked in later. He was actually punching tennis ball markers.
I saw that. Yeah.
The magic is gone. That was a cool shot, though.
Yeah. So I mean, all of these scenes were all directly inspired by bullet time. All of these
they were.
And some people didn't know how to do the effect, so they faked it. I mean, it's so ubiquitous now because now NFL and basketball uses it. They use it in there.
Yep.
Yeah, they use it where they revolve around. I mean, it's not 48 cameras, but it's 12.
Yeah,
and they're able to revolve around. They'll pause a moment and they'll revolve around the player.
So cool.
Yeah, and so
that's my favorite part about sports is when they do cool camera stuff. I'll watch it just for the camera movements. I'm like, I want to control that cable camera. That's a dream job. I've actually seen in the photography world, I've seen these things where there's a 360 camera rig where it's a large circle, probably 15 feet in diameter, maybe more. And you can come up and pay, $20 to get your 3D photo taken. And what you do is you stand in the middle and you do something crazy. You jump, you throw something, do a handstand or whatever. And all the cameras fire at once, and then they can put it into an animation sequence where you can go around, 360, like around and around, and it's a frozen moment. I've seen some really interesting takes on that where they're taking it to the next level. Now they're doing long exposure 360 stills. So it's like a 5-second photo where someone's moving around like a light wand or, a light painting tool, like just an LED flashlight. And they have fog on the scene, and it's all captured in one moment, but it's actually a long exposure moment. So now you've got light going around someone in 3 dimensions. It's just really trippy to look at. I wish I could tell you what to look up to find that stuff, but there's a few different versions of it. And I've seen some really creative stuff done with it that kind of makes you say, how the heck did they do that?
Oh, witchcraft.
Yeah, witchcraft, basically. Interesting.
It's still a mystery. And the amazing thing about The Matrix is that the visual effects still hold up today.
Yeah,
they still hold up today.
Really
They're a little, maybe, to us cinema files, they're probably a little bit like, I know what they're doing there.
Yeah.
But to the average viewer that sees that, they're like, oh my gosh,
The first movie is solid with the VFX. Although the one shot that kind of makes me cringe a little bit is when Neo wakes up in his pod and we see that squid drone come up into his face. For some reason, that drone itself is just kind of like, they could have done better. And they did do better later. But that's only slightly weak. It's not even terrible. It's just like
when he grabs it on him, when he grabs him by his neck.
Yeah, it feels too key framed and just stiff and bad textures. But it's a minor complaint. I mean, hey,
on that note, I didn't mind that scene, but the scene that really ruined it for me was when he rescues rescues Morpheus, and then Neo and Trinity are in the helicopter. Oh, okay. And then Agent Smith shoots the helicopter. Helicopter's going to crash into a building. Neo gets the rope and ties it in. And, so anyway, the helicopter crashes into the building and it's slow motion. And as it crashes into the building, you see these the glass windows kind of, the shockwaves kind of warp, way over warping. I'm like, okay, well, I guess the code is bending because of the change. But, if we're actually in the Matrix, everybody would see that massive wave. I was like, nah, that bends it too much. That takes it too far.
I would love to see.
I didn't like that.
I would love to see a Animatrix type short film within the Matrix universe where someone in the Matrix tries to blow the top off the whole thing to a mass quantity of people at once. Wouldn't that be trippy?
Yeah.
Like they try to wake people up in mass. I don't know, somehow cult or something. That'd be cool. All right, so
the Rapture.
Yeah. Oh, dang! That's what the Rapture is. We're getting woke, waking up out of simulation. We'll get to the theology later. So let's talk about the story itself. So,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler. If you've been living under the rock for 20 years, 20 years,
20 years, man.
Yeah. Okay, so the story of the Matrix, we've all seen the first Matrix, and that really gives you all you need to know about the basics of the simulation, being a simulation, there being a real world, there being Zion, there's people coming out, there's, the good guys, quote unquote, the Zionists are trying to get people out of the simulation for their own sake and also to join the Zionist cause, to fight back against the machine. So if you've just seen the movies, you may not know how they got to this point. And the history or the backstory is actually explained in depth in one of the short films of the Animatrix, which was a DVD that came out, I think, after the first movie was released. And it had 9 stories made, written, and produced by totally different people of different art styles. So some of them are straight up anime, some are full CGI, and it was really cool. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the Animatrix DVD is still at our parents' house. I saw it.
Oh yeah,
I saw it somewhere a few years ago, and I was like, "Oh, good memories."
I might actually have it. I don't know. I'll have to dig around for it.
Yeah, they were a good supplement.
They were cool. It was very creative how they did the different styles. But one of the stories talks about where the AI came from. Why is it bad? Why is it enslaving humans for energy? Basically, in a nutshell, humans made AI to do menial tasks, cleaning the house, doing hard labor jobs, and it was going great. Until one robot overhears his owner discussing turning him off and changing him in for a new one because he doesn't like his droid or his robot for some obscure reason. And the robot goes into self-preservation mode. And he's like, I don't want to get switched off. I don't want to die. And ends up in an altercation with the owner, kills the owner. And now we've got a bunch of legal crap hitting the fan with, AI are sentient, AI can kill, robots are in a danger, even though they've totally infiltrated normal society. They're everywhere. And humans are freaking out. A bunch of back and forth happens with robots rising up and saying, we demand rights, we demand individuality, we don't want to be slaves anymore. Humans, of course, are like, no, we need free labor. And, classic human stuff with demolishing and downplaying other people's rights.
And that is why we need the 3 laws.
The laws are robots. Exactly. And a few other back and forth things happen politically. Eventually, the robots say, okay, we'll move to our own city and we'll mind our own dang business. You can let us be free, but we're also not going to bother you guys anymore. And then the humans eventually bomb the city, and now we're in an all-out war of AI versus humans, and the AI, the machine, whatever you would call it, robots, basically nearly wipe out all human life on the Earth. And it's really messy. As a last-ditch effort, the humans, to keep themselves alive, in order to basically kill the main energy source of the robot machines, who use solar power primarily, the humans launch some nanoparticle stuff into the atmosphere to block the sun from hitting the Earth's surface. And that's why we have a Gotham atmosphere in the real world of the Matrix movies, is because humans blocked out the sun so that the robots would not have solar power.
Yeah, the government calls it MAD, mutually assured destruction.
There you go.
And so they're like, well, you guys can't live, and they take the risk because the risk is, we'll go down deep into the earth and we'll destroy you. He says it'll take a couple hundred years before we can come back up, but so that ends up backfiring.
Yeah, it sure does. Do y'all remember the year that the Matrix Real World takes place? Is it like 2099 or 2199?
2199.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Right. Yeah, so there's quite a few decades of different history things happening, which you can find online. But that's the gist of it. Is the machine, Machine City, which is shown in Revolutions, the third movie. That's where the whole thing began. That was their private island, and that's or rather a country, their own robot country, where it all started. So that's how we are where we are now. And of course, robots with no solar power, they start harvesting humans and hooking them up to stuff to suck the energy out, use thermo, whatever, bioelectric, conduits, and using them as batteries. But the humans don't like being plugged into stuff, so they got to fool them with a simulation. And that's where we get the Matrix. So the Matrix is itself basically a virtual reality program, like a video game that's run, and the humans are plugged directly into it. Their senses, through their brain jack. I don't know what it's really called, but the jack on the back of their head, which gives the computer system complete access to all their nervous system and everything. The first version of the Matrix, and this is where it gets really interesting, which you learn in the second movie, but there's been up to the second movie, there's been 6 versions of actually 5 previous versions. The Matrix Reloaded, when it gets rebooted, that's the 6th version, right?
Yes.
Am I counting wrong?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Neo is the one of the 5th universe, and 6th the universe gets started. So,
or is he the one?
We'll talk
about that.
No, he's the 6th. He's the 6th iteration. That's all one. The Matrix hasn't technically rebooted yet. So 1 through 3 is all the 6th iteration. It hasn't been destroyed yet.
Oh, correct.
Okay, gotcha.
So that whole thing, because until he gets to the architect, and that's when he reveals that he is the 6th iteration. Yeah. So Neo and that Matrix is the 6th iteration, or the 6th rebooting of everything. Yeah.
So just like a video game gets updates throughout the years, the Matrix has been getting upgrades and fixes and tweaks to make it more suitable to fool the humans, so that they don't fight back, so they don't wake up in their pods, and thus robots lose another energy source, even though they've got millions and millions and millions of them. The Matrix has gone through different revisions. The first one was basically a perfect heavenly paradise where everyone was happy all the time. There was no sickness or, negativity of any kind, seems like. And it was too good. And humans realized there's something's wrong. And, they start fighting back, and they start rebelling and questioning reality. And then they wake up somehow, and the robots are not happy because they're losing energy sources. The second version was the total opposite. They said, well, I guess we need pain and suffering. Let's do a whole bunch of that. And it was like hell and, terrible. But that was too much negativity, too much darkness. So there's a third and fourth version which apparently involved vampires and werewolves. Maybe a mix of good and bad. They're trying to get a good balance in the system. We don't know anything about the 4th or 5th, as far as I know. And the 6th is where the movie, Matrix opens, is in the 6th Matrix version. And it's a decent mix of good and bad. It's what we would consider like our actual real world. But now there's free will. I think other previous versions maybe didn't have as much free will on the part of the humans, because remember, they're in a simulation. So they maybe would have been led down deterministic routes, or they couldn't really choose certain things. And that's why that caused them to wake up. And the Oracle comes in as another computer program, which is made to help and study the human psyche to figure out, okay, what's the best way to set up this program, the simulation of the Matrix, and so that it doesn't rub humans the wrong way, mentally, so that they stay fooled, they stay asleep, and they don't get woke. We want them to stay asleep, so they'll be happy little, juicy batteries for us. And that's where the Oracle comes in. So that's how she knows so much about human, mentalities, and she can actually predict the future, not directly, but more statistically, from what I read. She knows the human emotions and reactions so much that she can statistically predict like what Neo might do in the next immediate decision. So that's kind of some cool stuff there with the Oracle. She's just another program among many other programs that get a personified human body in the Matrix. Because she's
kind of like Tron.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Smith is a computer program as well. The Merovingians are programs. The Keymakers are program. But when we're in the Matrix, we see a human virtualized version of them, and we can see what they're doing in the computer world. So before we get into defining more, biographical stuff about the different characters and who they really are, what they really mean, I wanted to talk about some of the effects of the story. So as I did a lot of research for this episode, I was watching numerous videos of people from different viewpoints and even different, interpretations of the movies talking about how the movie affected them, which I really enjoyed those parts of those various videos. And a lot of people like you, Abi, said they were inspired to get into film, to get into VFX, to get into writing, because the just amazing, inspirational quality of this movie, because it's so different. So one guy, and actually not one guy, a few of them talked about how this is actually on some podcasts I listened to, is that how they were raised in Christian households, and this movie changed how they viewed their faith in a not a good way. And I want to discuss this for a little bit, because from what they said, it basically kind of paints this picture that the Matrix kind of, in their own words, helped them wake up and see, like, maybe everything I thought was real isn't real. And it was just one of the, things that kind of chipped away at their faith, if you will. I don't know if you even want to see it that way, but yeah, what do you guys think about that? Have you all heard of that? Do you think it maybe affected you in the opposite way?
If I had to say anything, I would say that it's just a simple, Occam's razor, the simplest answer is always the most true. And that being that life imitates art, or is it that art imitates life? I think this is a case of life imitating art. And if you take it at its simplistic form, yeah, we're we're all controlled by this supernatural will of God, and it's exactly what they're talking about in the Matrix, and it's control, and and I don't believe in this fate and everything like that.
Yeah.
But fate and faith is not that simple. That's the complexity of spirituality, is that you can't just define it by something that's just superficially, a superficial worldview like what the Matrix is. It's completely much deeper than that. But I could see that if you're not willing to do the legwork as far as the philosophy, if you're gonna dump your faith because of a movie, then you probably didn't have that faith to begin with.
There you go.
And so, because it does pose a lot of philosophical questions about what sovereignty is, what the sovereign God is, what freedom of self and free will, and you start to look into those things. It's a lot deeper. It's just a lot deeper and much more muddy as far as gray philosophy than some sort of Freudian approach to it all. It's just a lot more complex. You can't just say, oh yeah, God is controlling us all, and we're all puppets.
It's just like this.
Yeah.
Gabe, what do you have to say about this idea of Matrix destroying people's faith or helping them wake up from the lie of religion, whatever?
A friend of mine back in high school, he grew up with me in church, and we went to all the same events and pretty much believed the same and practiced the same. And he watched the Da Vinci Code. And, I'm an atheist now.
Oh boy!
What? What? And he read the books, and yeah, man, we're all being lied to, and it's all control. So it just led me to believe that, well, his faith probably wasn't that strong. And I think movies like this are so well done. It really does make you think about reality as you leave the movie theater. I enjoy movies that don't answer the questions at the end, that when I leave the theater, I'm thinking about the movie, like, well, maybe it ends like this, or what might continue, and what are they going to do now? And so I think as far as faith goes, me coming from a Christian perspective, it hits on some important apologetical topics, because there's different religions being presented as one reality in the movie. So if you're not deeply rooted in either one of those religions, I could see how that might confuse a young Christian or a young Hindu or whatever.
It's got almost all the world religions represented. Somehow,
it really does.
Somehow in the sci-fi,
really
they managed to do that.
Yeah, and all world religions come down to maybe 2 or 3 different categories, and definitely the Matrix hits on all of those topics. So if someone is weak in their faith, then I could see how that might freak them out a little bit.
I kind of feel that the idea of reality being illusion and them needing to wake up out of it actually doesn't chip away at the Christian worldview. I think that actually, in a loose, creative way, for the sake of this narrative, I think that it kind of supports it. Because in the Christian worldview, we believe that this world actually is real. We don't believe we're living in a dream. This is not God's imagination. This is not a simulation, whatever, or some like weird test before we do real life. This is real, physical world, universe. But there's a greater reality beyond this reality. There's another level. There's an original area of existence. It's beyond the material universe, which is heaven, the eternal.
Well, I think
realm.
that is a theme in most religions that tap into that idea that there's different layers of reality and dimensions.
It's nothing new.
Yeah. So I think the Matrix touches that enough that that feels right. Okay, yeah, but what side of the fence am I going to be on, and where am I at, and my life's a lie.
Yeah, and of course the big differences between the world religions is how do we get to that higher dimension? Is it through our own whatever? Is it through our own letting go of things? Is it by someone else's work that got us there? So that's a different discussion for a different podcast.
Oh boy.
I think what's interesting about what you just said though is when Morpheus states, that in the beginning there was one that have we talked about that, or is that a little bit further? Yet. Is that a little bit further?
You can go ahead.
Okay. When he talks about, that there was one that was born inside the Matrix that freed the first of us. And
that's cool.
I always like to think of that as like the Messiah figure. And we really don't know. When you talked about the iterations, and it just so happens that there's 5 up until the new industrial revolution or industrial era. We're in the 6th era of mankind, from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age to the Iron Age and different ages. We're actually in the 6th. So there's some parallels there. So if we look at the 3rd age, which is the age that Christ was born into, number 3, and a whole bunch of different. That's when it happened. Yeah, and they say that Morpheus, people have posited that Morpheus was referring to the original Messiah and about the oracle prophesying, or he prophesied his return. Not the oracle, but he prophesied his return. And that's exactly what Jesus did, is he prophesied his second coming. And those first few that were there's 12 of them, and there's 12 people on the council of Zion. So there's a lot of different elements there that are like, okay, so now these are just people that have taken over for the original 12 council and stuff like that. And there's a really cool parallel there. And well, I bring that up just because it's a really good, cool tie-in to the Christian narrative that Christians believe, that mainstream Christianity believes.
And if we're talking about Matrix iterations being kind of a metaphor for historical period eras, even theologically, in many biblical interpretations of the Bible and all of history, we call them ages. And I think in most views, we're in the 6th age.
Is it dispensations or ages?
Dispensations, yeah.
Dispensationalism teaches we're in the 6th. Yeah, the 7th is the kingdom.
Yeah, right, and then the 8th is eternity.
We're in the church.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a connection there too. Do you feel that Neo is relatable as an everyman?
Thomas, yes.
Thomas
Anderson.
Thomas.
Yeah.
I think he is relatable to a normal guy because he's got kind of 2 realities, working at the computer programming business, whatever it's called. Huh. And then he's also a crook.
Yeah.
Hacking and writing programs. So I like that. And he lives in a crappy apartment, 1-room apartment, and he's just up all night, and he really has three lives, because in his hacker life, he's a hacker, but then deeper, he's even looking how to escape reality and maybe looking for more and looking for what's really out there. So he's kind of a spiritual seeker looking for the Matrix. So
he's one of the 1% that rejects the Matrix. So we find out later that 1% of the population, their brain just is not compatible long-term with staying in the Matrix. They will at least question reality to some amount. And Neo is, and Thomas is one of them, that he is thinking, there's like, when I dream, sometimes it feels more real than, real life. And there's a few quotes spread throughout the movie where it's like he questioned and he was seeking Morpheus to find the greater reality. Pretty cool. So let's talk about one of the most confusing points of probably the whole trilogy. No pressure. It is the architect scene. Ergo,
the scene when he
wins forth vis-a-vis, if you will, and then some. I have no idea what I'm even talking about right now. The architect scene is visually really interesting because we've got all those TV screens in the back.
Yeah, it's fun.
For a while, I thought those were actually looking into different Matrix iterations where, Thomas did the same thing, but a little different. I don't think that's kind of more like it's different timeline branches almost of what he would do, but just in that
probability.
Matrix.
Each one is like a different probability of what's going on.
That's a great way to put it.
And we do see Keanu Reeves laugh and show some emotion at one of those TV screens. It's the most emotion any human character has in the whole trilogy. He's like laughing or whatever. He's constantly roasted for just being so dull in these movies. But I think it was actually a director's call. I think it was an acting choice because all the human characters are on some level very machine-like. Some of them, there's some exceptions. But the main three characters, Trinity, Morpheus, and Neo, are very, very machine-like, don't you think? But Agent Smith, he's trying to become human, and he laughs and very awkwardly. that weird laugh is like, oh, just stop. But the Oracle is a computer program. She's very grandmotherly, very emotional and warm. The architect, maybe not so much emotional, but very human in his discussion and his ability to converse. It's just like, it's weird. The computers are being more human than the humans are. I thought that was a cool theme. Did you guys pick up on that?
Yeah, I think the stiffness of the characters while they're plugged into the Matrix, due to the part that's not their real body, possibly, and how everybody's kind of walking around a little more stiff. If you're woke, if you're unplugged, and then you go back into the Matrix, you're a little stiffer and more.
It's not real.
Badass looking.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've noticed about Neo, and I don't know if it's just him as an actor, as Keanu Reeves, or if it's specifically the character by director, his posture. I can't remember if I saw this or if I just remember a lie, but I think I remember seeing that he wore a neck brace.
Yeah,
to keep his neck stiff while he was doing stunts. Right?
No, he got hurt.
Crazy.
No, he got hurt, and he had to wear the neck brace. So then when he took it off, they actually ended up keeping it, and it's like, hey, it looks cool.
That's funny.
It's a
because he was so stiff with his neck, even from the very beginning.
Very like turning
Thomas.
like Batman and stuff. And
it was really weird, and that I think that really gave depth to the character. I don't know. It just
I agree.
Unanswerable posture. Like, what? The posture's not right. And me and my background of personal training and physical therapy, I'm like, that's not right. He needs an adjustment.
Yeah.
That's not natural. It makes, when I see him fighting like crazy, owning people and not moving his head, I'm just like, dude, that guy's a total master. He doesn't even need to turn his head. He doesn't need to react and look around to make sure he's not going to get hit. He knows. That's interesting. There's your little touch there.
Well, in part 2, the Oracle, when he's sitting down at the bench right before he fights all the Smiths, the Oracle divulges to him like the nature of everybody, that everybody's a piece of code, that anybody who's not a human connected to the Matrix, they're all code. Smith, the Oracle, she foreshadows the architect, but even the people like the Merovingian and all these random codes, they when they're subjected to be deleted, they can either go back to the source, or if they choose not to go back to the source, then they become this random anomaly in the code, which is where we get ghosts and where we get all these monsters glitches, and glitches.
Bigfoot.
That's perfect. So that kind of brings us back to the architect discussion that I started. I love the bunny trails that are happening, by the way. They're always really good. But so back to the architect scene, he explains that there will always be a one, capital O, that will be able to control the simulation, which is Neo in this case, and previous matrices. We can assume there's other ones. And in order to deal with the inevitableness of having an anomaly or a one that can control things, Zion was created, and it's allowed to exist because it's going to be kind of a sink to collect all the rebels that break up out of the system. They're going to be drawn to this one spot to follow the one, to group together for survival and try to fight the system. The Zion forces are allowed to pull people out of the Matrix in order to deal with those minds, that 1% that's going to reject the Matrix. But they can't change human, psychology in the real world, but they can at least give them a place to hide and put them in one place so they can more easily destroy them when the time comes to reboot the Matrix. Because eventually,
give them hope.
Yeah, they give them some false hope, which I love. Now, I don't like the idea of a prophecy being a lie. That's terrible. And of course, people believe that about Christianity in various ways. But in this story, I love what a big surprise it is, because we always rely on that ancient prophecy of the savior, the one to defeat the evil forces. It's found in fantasy. It's found in some sci-fis. It's a very big trope that I'm kind of tired of.
The Lego movie.
Hey, that's okay. Don't mess with Lego movie.
Inspirational movie.
Yeah. No, that's a piece of film history right there. But I like what they did with it. They totally flipped the trope upside down because it's obvious. It's a lie. There's no question about it. Once we get to that point in the second movie where we learn about the truth of the prophecy, that the Oracle made it as a ploy to lead people to follow this one, all the divergent Matrix rejecting people to get them in one place. And once they get too big, which is going to happen in time, right? It's not an if, but it's a when. Then we are going to release the robot squids to go destroy them, and they'll have to reboot the Matrix because I don't know why they have to reboot the Matrix. Honestly, I don't understand that part.
I think it's one of those. Okay, tell yourself whatever makes you, whatever helps you sleep better, architect. I think that they just trying to rationalize the loss of control. I don't think that's actually true. I think that they're just because machines can't rationalize a being that doesn't want to be a part of this perfect utopia that they've set up. They tell them they believe their own lie, that the machines believe their own lie. So I don't necessarily agree with that because, we know in part 3, they end up living, they end up making a negotiation with, I'm getting ahead of the podcast here, but just a little bit, but it's just to emphasize the fact that I don't agree with that necessarily with that sentiment. I think it's just the architect trying to rationalize, the existence of Zion, because the whole time they've been there. Morpheus even is able to throw back and recall history of the other matrices.
Oh.
And so
how's that? Yeah, how's that possible?
How's that possible if he was rebooted and then he escaped?
Well, Merovingian, he was apparently the one in another iteration.
Oh, really?
Oh, I never caught that. What's the story there? I didn't.
Yeah. He said, I was just like you, and I was in your same position when they were having dinner.
What? The fancy French guy?
Yeah.
That likes wiping his butt with silk?
So what you're saying is that he was one of the ones that chose to go back in?
No, he was the same character as Neo is.
Yeah, the anomaly.
He was the one. He was the anomaly in one of the past iterations. Correct me. I mean, anybody that's listening to this, go back and watch the Merovingian scene where they go up the elevator, and then the keymaker retrieval scenes. Yeah, I think he said that I was just like you.
But I think that I missed that too. I think maybe because the one was prophesied to bring freedom to Zion. So the Merovingian, I think maybe that was him just referring to the fact that he figured out the Matrix and decided to use the Matrix for his own pleasure as opposed to escape. So he stayed. He's like, look what I can do with the Matrix,
Yeah, I got
and
power.
he does that thing with his girlfriend or whatever, and he's able to manipulate the Matrix to suit his pleasure.
Yeah, he writes code.
Yeah, so he writes code and manipulates it. He's like, look what I can do. See, I could
Look what I can do.
Yeah.
You make a muffin.
Yeah, and he's able to control. So I my opinion would be simply, I like where you're going with that. I'll have to rewatch that part with that in mind. But I took that as like he learned how to manipulate the Matrix in his favor for his pleasure, which is why he had so much money, which is why he had so many people in his court, which is why he was able to quickly and easily manipulate that lady in the restaurant and things like that. But I like your take. I've never heard that before.
So changing direction slightly, how do you guys feel about the sequels? Do you like them? Do you hate them?
I thought they completed the story. Go ahead, Gabe.
I think the first one was a standalone movie.
Yeah.
It didn't need any more sequels.
Mm-hmm.
Which I always cringe when I see number 2 and I'm always suspect, it's gonna suck and I'm not gonna like it. I'm gonna watch it because it's cool, but it's gonna answer too many questions that I liked not answering after the first one. But the second, third one, I feel that it did a really good job about
they took it way
handling
deeper.
it carefully. Yeah, I think they did a good job.
I mean, the prophecy was totally legit in the first movie. We didn't know it was a lie, as far as I recall. And then it's like the prophecy is a lie, and then there's other matrices. There's just the Wachowskis. I don't know how they write this stuff, and we don't have time to get into it in this episode. But there are so many callbacks to philosophy, to ancient Greek names, to religious references in even just the naming of the characters, like Morpheus and Trinity. There's so many, and Neo being like an anagram of 1, and his rune number is 101 or something like that, and Cypher, named all the names, very, very purposeful. And I mean, I got to hand it to the Wachowskis because they wrote a deep, compelling, full circle and then some story.
Well, I knew there was going to be a part 2 and 3 when he flew at the very end.
I need more of that.
I'm
that
like,
was the coolest thing.
Yeah, because I'm like, wait a second, why did he just fly away? And so the DVD special features, I'm a behind the scenes guy. I love watching all that stuff because
me too.
They said that they had actually written a trilogy. It was always intended to be a trilogy. And so it makes sense that it's a standalone because what they do is they try to close it off in case it bombs. In case it's horrible, we'll just make it, we'll close it off.
All right.
But it was always intended to be a trilogy. Because because at some point the Messiah or the one has to sacrifice himself for the sake of the people, which is what ends up happening in part 3, which he goes and he makes a negotiation on behalf of the people to the ones that are trying to kill the people. And so then he becomes truly the Messiah, which will be really interesting. What they do in part 4.
Yeah,
I think it's the second coming. I think it has everything to do with the second coming. I think they'll
come back.
I think they'll have elements of the rapture in there. I really do.
Yeah.
The eschatology. They'll bring in a lot of Christian eschatology into it to make it
apocalypse or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, like all of a sudden, 1/3 or 1/4 of all humanity disappears. Where'd they go? They all woke up.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
So something along those lines where maybe he unplugs a whole farm. Let's say there's 4 sectors of farms, and then he's able to unplug one. So that whole section of humanity just wakes up.
Yeah.
And it's like,
that'd be incredible.
Yeah.
Now, I would love to see them overthrow the machines, but at the same time, I feel like it would be going back on what Neo did. It's like he made a truce. That's cool. Will the robot told to it past the third movie? I don't know, but I have mixed feelings about what could happen in the fourth film as far as the relationship between man and machine.
So, I mean, as far as 2 and 3, I really liked them. I thought they completed the story for me.
Yeah.
Because I felt that him flying away was a cliffhanger.
It really was. Well, speaking of cliffhangers, I'm going to throw you one right now and tell you that this is the end of part 1 of the Matrix episode. Unfortunately, this discussion was just too good to keep within 1 hour, 1 episode, and I just felt like it would be a better idea to split it up, make it a little easier to digest, and not scare people away with a 2.5 hour episode. So make sure to join us next week for part 2. It's going to blow your mind even more and dive deeper into the rabbit hole of the red pill and all the goodness that followed. Well, thanks for listening, and I can't wait to be in your ears next week.
If you like this show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also find our previous episodes there and listen whenever you want. We love to hear from our listeners, so if you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes, you can reach us at tvvpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and have a great week.
And fasten your seatbelt, door 3. Door 3.
Door 3. Door 4.